Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. You're listening to this, so chances are you love animals. I have loved dogs my entire life, but I have a confession. For many years, I did not like cats. However, due to life circumstances during my 20s, a cat entered my life, and in a very good way, I was never the same. His name was Yoda, and I fell head over heels in love with the guy. Although I had rescued him from the animal shelter, it would be fair to say that he rescued me right back. He taught me life lessons on how to care for another and how to care for myself. In the quiet and without words, he helped me heal certain wounds just by hanging out. It turns out that my experience was hardly anomalous, and the expert on this episode is the perfect person to explain how and why pets are so good for us. Carol Novello was CEO of Humane Society Silicon Valley, and she now serves as CEO and founder of an organization called Mutual Rescue. Simply put, Carol is amazing. She earned a Harvard MBA. She worked for years in the corporate sector and then pivoted to devote her life to addressing the pet-human bond. She is the author of a fantastic book called Mutual Rescue, and she has studied how the pet-human bond is reciprocal, and her book has a huge bibliography corroborating her work. And on her Mutual Rescue website, she shares films that clearly show the measurable impact pets have had in their humans' lives. So join Carol and me as we have a lively discussion on how the pets we rescue end up rescuing us right back. Carol Novello, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you so much. It is a delight to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. You know, everyone is loving your book called Mutual Rescue. Everyone from Publishers Weekly to a recent Super Psyched podcast guest, Dr. Temple Grandin. And count me in. I love this book. And it really just hit me right at the heartstrings. I told you before we started speaking that in 2002, I gave a speech for Toastmasters on the pet-human bond. And here you've created a compendium with more than 10 pages of references scientifically backing up, corroborating all of the data that you're sharing with the public about the power of the pet-human bond and on so many levels. I'm just so excited to have you on this podcast.
Well, thank you so much. You know, it really was a lot of fun finding a way to communicate both the heart of the human-animal bond through the stories, as well as the head component through the science, and integrating that in a way that it could speak to the different ways people respond to information and how they take it in.
Major success. You did it. And before we even get into the meat of the book, the research, your new mission with Mutual Rescue, Carol, let's just start with your story. You've got an MBA from Harvard. You've worked in the corporate sector, including high-tech Silicon Valley, and then major pivot. Tell us about how that happened.
Well, it was interesting. I refer to myself as a rehabbed type A person. I loved my career in Silicon Valley. I was a senior executive at Intuit for many years, a fabulous company. And when I joined that company, it was about 400 million. When I left, it was 3 billion. And if I wanted to work for a $3 billion company, and now it's probably even bigger than that, but Intuit would certainly be that company. But it had gotten to the point where the nature of the work had changed. And I really decided I wanted to take some time off and figure out what I really wanted to do. And I actually thought I would go back into high tech. But through serendipity, I ended up being introduced to the board chair at Humane Society Silicon Valley and ended up joining the board with no intention, again, of ever running the organization. But 6 months into being on the board, the president at the time and the board chair at the time asked me to have breakfast. And I thought they were going to tell me I was a horrible board member. And, and instead, they asked me if I wanted to run the organization. And, before I could even think about it, I said yes. I mean, it just popped out of my mouth. And, but it's a funny story because I had actually put together a list of 10 criteria of what I was looking for in my next role. And much to my surprise, when I took a step back and I looked at the role of being president of Humane Society of Silicon Valley, it actually met all 10 criteria.
Can you just share what one or two of them?
I'll tell you the one where I actually think I set the bar too low. It was, you can bring your pets to work. But I realized in hindsight that the higher bar would have been that you can have pet hair on your clothes and it actually increases your credibility rather than detracts from it.
No need for lint rollers. Just
exactly.
Show up with all the pet hair.
Yeah, exactly. But other things on the list were, a product or service that I felt passionate about, a strong team, alignment with values. Money was not on the list.
Right.
I really wanted to, free myself from that being an overarching criteria. So I was really delighted when the opportunity came along, and so I just jumped in and I ran the organization for almost a decade.
Wow. And it sounds like that was a good choice.
It was an amazing experience. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that Humane Society of Silicon Valley became the first shelter in the world to meet the guidelines put forth by the Association of Shelter Veterinarians. And shelter medicine, the best way to describe it, especially now that people might understand, this is the prep work that you do so that a pandemic never ravages your population. And essentially, by having protocols and practices in place that help you manage disease, it prevents it from spreading throughout the shelter. So it really helps save lives. And when those guidelines first came out, people were very skeptical about whether or not it was really even possible to implement them. So it's a little bit like, landing on the moon. You have to prove it can be done, and then other people will follow. So that's a huge legacy I feel that I left for Humane Society of Silicon Valley, as well as for for the animal welfare sector in total. And then the other thing that came out of my work at Humane Society of Silicon Valley was the creation of Mutual Rescue. And that really came about because people would sometimes ask me, and this may resonate for you just because of how you think about animals, but people would say to me, why are you helping animals when you could be helping people?
So I already know the answer to that question, but I want you to answer it. I love what you said. I've heard the answer. So why is it that perhaps dollars spent on animals might actually be really good for humanity? Can you explain that?
More often than not, when we're rescuing an animal, they're rescuing us right back. And I think one of the things that is so amazing to me, I started collecting stories when I was working at HSSV about people that were being transformed by the adoption experience. One of my first stories early on was, somebody that came in with a disability, and they ended up adopting an animal that had that same disability. And it was the sense of validation that I'm not alone. There's somebody else that gets this. And seeing the animal's resilience to their disability helped inspire the person. And that just kind of, set something in motion for me. And I just started collecting these stories, and then I'd read the science. And it just felt like there was a real opportunity to kind of put a bow around the whole thing and build a brand around it and use that to elevate the cause of animal welfare. So one of the things that's interesting is there's $449 billion that Americans gave to charity in 2019. And of that, a little over 3% goes to animal and environmental causes combined.
Wow.
And I was shocked by that percentage. And one of the reasons I wanted Mutual Rescue to be created is I wanted to elevate the cause of animal welfare so that people realize when you're helping animals, it's not at the expense of helping humans. It's actually part of the solution. And that's really pretty amazing.
So since this is a psychology podcast, tell us, what are some of the psychological benefits of having a pet in one's life?
One of the things that I love the most about having a pet, and I talk about the research of Dr. Corey Bussolari from University of San Francisco, and she talks about animals being a positive corrective emotional experience.
So true.
And essentially, if you didn't have the experience of being loved or accepted or validated when you were growing up, how are you going to know what that feels like? Someone can tell you about it, but it's not an intellectual exercise. It's a feeling exercise. And essentially, an animal can provide that experience. And I view animals, and especially rescue animals, because I think that there's a level of appreciation they have for the love that you are giving them. That, I mean, essentially, they're a portal. They're a portal into the experience of love.
You know, I was previously not a lover of cats, and due to odd circumstances, I ended up with a cat and fell madly in love with this cat, who introduced me to what I refer to as my inner purr. I didn't realize I had this ability, and there was so much correction that transpired while he was purring on my chest. And I was able to heal so many wounds by learning how to be a father, learning how to be responsible, going to work knowing this guy has got some real health challenges and he's kind of expensive to care for. I'd better crush it at work. And one of the things that I've seen in your videos, I've watched all the mutual rescue videos. Everybody, watch them all. They're just so good. I don't even have words. But one of the themes is they teach us to be better humans.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that? How do pets actually make us better people?
I think the level of acceptance and non-judgmentalness that animals, they role model that for us. And we need role models for that more than ever right now. And so when you see that, you recognize that it's possible. And that's one of the, I think, the wonderful things that animals do for us is help us see that it is possible. And it's like, there's a great line in the, you mentioned the mutual rescue films, which people can see at mutualrescue.org. And people, I mean, this is floating around out there in the animal world, but it's like Eric O'Gray talks about this in his experience of adopting Petey. He said, I wanted to become the person that my dog thinks I am.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And the other thing is the physical benefits. I believe with Petey, he was an overweight, middle-aged man who was basically bullied on an airplane for being, quote, too fat to get the airplane moving. And he decided as a middle-aged, overweight male to get himself a middle-aged, overweight dog. And the two of them would rehab physically together. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
So I love that. So what is some of the physiological benefits of having a pet in your life?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there are so many. I mean, you talked a little bit earlier about healing with the cat that you got.
Oh, he was the best.
And, one of the things is there's research that basically says a cat's purr vibrates at a frequency that helps heal bones.
That feels correct.
So anyway, that's just an aside. But some of the other things, first of all, there's the chemicals that are released in your body through the interaction. So when you're interacting with an animal, it releases oxytocin, prolactin, serotonin. Those are all the feel-good chemicals that are going into your body. So that's going to change you physically as well as emotionally. The other thing is, especially if you have a dog, getting out and exercising. I mean, the dog's gonna be like, hey, here's my leash. I'm ready to go.
Totally.
And Eric's story is just a great example of that. And there's some wonderful research that was done by Maggie O'Hare in Missouri. And she did a study, and it's called there's a program there. I think it's like walk a hound, drop a pound, or something like that. And they did a study, and what happened is that people were coming to walk shelter dogs, and they felt this. They started to develop this commitment and this sense of responsibility, and they wanted to show up to make sure that the dogs. That was a nice slip.
That was a nice slip.
Yeah, that the gods got walked. That the dogs got walked. And they just ended up losing weight because they were out walking the dogs, which is pretty amazing. I mean, there's other research that basically says your risk for heart disease goes down, your blood pressure goes down, all kinds of wonderful things that animals are doing for you physiologically as well as emotionally. And I think they also do a lot for us spiritually as well. I interviewed the pastor from my church, and he said this wonderful thing. He said, there's something about the way we're wired that when we are holding an animal or petting an animal and having that experience, it makes the peace of God real to us. And I love that. That may not speak to everybody, but I think it shows you the spectrum by which animals can introduce new dimensions to our life and help us experience ourselves and others in a more enriching and vibrant way.
I love the way that you described pets as a portal, and they are a portal to so many things. And I remember after my dog Motsi died, I was, crestfallen, and I put out a list of all of the people he introduced me to. We had just moved to a new neighborhood. He introduced me to everybody in like a square mile, and including the person who ended up basically getting me my first TED Talk, so far my first TED Talk, my only TED Talk. And now having a dog as part of my psychology practice, a trained canine good citizen, certified therapy dog, he's become like an appendage. And so I refer to him as the appendage. He's like a body part. And he's in my picture for the Super Psych podcast photo. So, I mean, there's a really big deal. And the oxytocin that you referred to, that was the basis around which I decided this would be probably good even for a high functioning clientele. I know that for severely traumatized people and for the autistic population, pets have just a preponderance of evidence that they are incredibly helpful. But I can tell you, at least anecdotally and clinically, the number of times people are willing to drop into what had been previously perceived as very dangerous terrain, they just go there more frequently with Rafi, the dog, in the room, whose name, by the way, comes from the Hebrew of Raphael, God's healer. So that's how I chose that name. But yeah, all of my pets, one of the things that I loved about your book is you kind of talk about the magic of pets and the circumstances that they come into people's lives, seemingly synchronistic and kind of beyond belief. And I know that's been true for me. Can you share some of the magic, some of the things that seem just almost like, wait, that couldn't have happened?
Well, one of my favorite stories is actually about Bridget Keenan, and I tell her story in the book. She's also an employee at Humane Society of Silicon Valley, and her sister passed away, and obviously, just gut-wrenching and really challenging. And she was very close to her sister. And her sister was living in Europe at the time she passed away. And it was just before Bridget was going to get on an airplane to go visit her. So she didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And that really was hard on her. And there's this wonderful room at Humane Society of Silicon Valley. It's called the Community Cat Room. Sunshine. Yeah, Sunshine Community Cat Room. Yeah. and you can go in there and just hang out with the cats and see who comes to talk to you or whatever. Well, Bridget was giving a tour. She came, shortly after she picked up her sister's ashes. She's back at work. She's giving a tour, and this cat comes up to her in the cat room, and she's like, "Oh, aren't you cute?" Whatever. She comes back another day. The cat comes up again. She comes back in a third day, and she's like, "This cat keeps coming up to her." And she's like, "Oh, this is ridiculous. What is this cat's name?" And she goes over and, looks at the board, and the cat's name is Keenan.
Unbelievable.
And she's like,
unbelievable.
And she just, in that moment, she just really felt as if, her sister was there with her.
Totally.
I mean, this cat singled her out and just, and it was funny because other people were like, oh, I've been in there. I haven't noticed that cat, or that cat didn't come up and talk to me. It was just the most, amazing story. And so she, of course, adopted Keenan, which is really funny because she'd take him to the vet and they'd be like, and what's your cat's name? Keenan. And what's his last name? Keenan. And they're like, your cat's name is Keenan? She's like, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just from the aftermath of tragedy, so many of these stories are so heartwarming. I think about on your video, Smiley Kylie, who had Liza or Eliza, and to Trubs, who had been in the shelter for 5 years without teeth and all types of viruses, and comes out and emerges, and how these pets emerge as just rock stars, and the humans are catapulted to a new, better reality consistently. It's rather mind-blowing to me that more people don't find a path to get a pet when clearly their lives would be so. What are the impediments? What are the things that keep people commonly from bringing a pet into their lives? And how might that impediment actually be shrunk?
So I think there's a couple things. I do think people have to be ready to welcome an animal into their home. And, I applaud people that are thoughtful in their approach.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to people say, I travel too much. I'm not home enough. And, if you're not willing to adjust your lifestyle whatsoever, then that is the right decision, because it's a responsibility to bring an animal into your home. At the same time, give yourself a reason so that you don't travel so much. Is that really the lifestyle that you want? And, having an animal in your home. I mean, one of the things, this is really, it's kind of embarrassing, but, I would run around in my job, again, being a rehab type A, and I'd go. And then I'd be like, oh my God, I have to go to the bathroom. I haven't gone to the bathroom. It's like, and then it's just an emergency. I got to go to the bathroom. The meeting's delayed because I basically, haven't peed all day, which is probably too much information.
Not even close. We're all good on this.
When you have a dog, it's like, you can't do that. Like, I would bring my dog Tess to work, and it's like, I have to, it's time to take Tess out. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to the bathroom, I'll stop on the way back. I mean, it forces you to actually, look at your own life differently, because you start to realize, how do I help take care of this animal? And in taking care of the animal, you end up taking better care of yourself. One of the stories that came to me, it was another podcast interview I did, and the gentleman said, you've got to talk to my sister. And I talked to his sister, and she shared this story. She was anorexic, and her family had kicked her. They're like, look, you have to get help. You're not willing to get help. They kicked her out of their family home. She's living in a motel, and a stray cat shows up at the motel door. And she ends up taking in this cat, and she fell in love with this cat, and this cat was skinny and needed to be fed. And so she's feeding the cat and taking care of the cat. And what she realized was the best way for her to take care of the cat and make sure that she was there to feed the cat was to feed herself.
Powerful.
It's experiential. And it saved her life.
Yeah. And to the point that you made earlier, there's something so visceral about being with an animal and tuning in to whatever kind of station they seem to be tuned into that is so helpful to reorient us as humans. I think that it's been my experience anyway, that pets really allow us to feel more authentically and have a greater sense of what it's like to be human in this interspecies connection.
Well, I think one of the things that I find most thrilling is that interspecies communication.
Yeah.
Because it connects you into the fact that we're part of something that's larger.
Yeah.
We might not understand it or know what it is, and people may define it in different ways depending on, their spiritual beliefs or whatnot. But regardless of where you fall in that spectrum, it does tap you into something that's bigger than you.
Sure.
And there's a great Gwen Cooper wrote a book called Homer, which is the adventures of a blind cat that she adopted. And just this great line, which I quote in my book, about she was watching some media story about a mom cat that was going into a burning building and pulling out her kittens, and just how much that resonated for her. And it got a lot of media attention. And she said, the reason why I think that's the case is because it shows us that loyalty, and nurturing is not only relegated to humanity. It's bigger than that. Mm. And so when we see it displayed, by a cat going in to save her babies, it's like, what is that? Like the sense of wonder and awe that loyalty and nurturing is a concept that's bigger than humanity. That's amazing.
So true. And there are such individual differences that some cats will do that, some might not. Some dogs will, really, really exhibit a particular trait, and others will not. And I'm wondering, what are some common misconceptions that people might have? I hear oftentimes, particularly from people who don't like cats, and say, well, I'm just absolutely positively, exclusively a dog person. I don't like cats. And I used to be that guy. And yet we have evidence that there are individual differences between cats. And that, amongst others, what are some common misconceptions that people have about pets and animals?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is we expect animals to all behave a certain way. Like, you've never been around animals, but they're just like people in the context of they're individuals. And
Totally.
Therefore they have different personalities, different characteristics. And so you don't approach every dog or every cat and go, oh, you're going to be this way.
Totally.
And so if you think about it in that context, it's like you don't meet and like every person that you meet. And I think the same thing is true with animals. And we need to give animals that respect. I mean, I think it's really important too. I mean, one of the things that Humane Society of Silicon Valley really focuses on is making a match. Like when you go to a shelter or a rescue group to adopt, people will sometimes come in and they'll be focused on what an animal looks like rather than, is that animal compatible with my lifestyle, and is their temperament compatible with my temperament? And, I remember a scenario where this family came in and they were really focused, again, they wanted a certain look, and they adopted a dog that had the look, but it had some kind of a hip issue, and they wanted to go out and hike, and this dog couldn't do that. So they ended up, bringing the animal back, which was the right thing to do
Sure.
in that situation. And the animal got adopted by a guy who, had a hip issue. So, it's like, I like to say there's a lid for every pot.
Oh.
And that's true with animals. I mean, you mentioned Trubs, who is a subject of one of our mutual rescue films, Jaden Trubs. And here was this cat that had been with this rescue organization for 5 years. And this cat was completely unsocial, and no one wanted to interact with him because he just was so grumpy. And Jade was a little girl on the autistic spectrum, and she was visiting one day with her mom. And this cat just took to her. I mean, it was amazing. And so they ended up adopting the cat and bringing it home. And then the cat helped transform something that Jade was going through. And you go watch the film so you can see how that plays out. But, the mutuality, I think, is important for people to understand, because, animals, like humans, are perfectly imperfect.
And I love the way that you are describing the quality of the match as being, it has to be forward and front and center. And there's a lid for every pot. I love that idea, because as I saw Jade enter the shelter, she went to a blanket where there was clearly something underneath it. And I imagined, I haven't spoken to Jade, that she felt a little bit like someone who was hiding, and that Trubs helped her, helped her, kind of midwifed her out of needing to hide.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that's very true.
And this Trubs is just like the coolest cat. So you got to see that video. But what
yeah, it's very cool. Well, it's funny, very early on in HSSB, I learned that there's a lid for every pot animal. And we had this cat. It was an older cat named Boo Boo Kitty. and Boo Boo Kitty, black cat, white bib. And she was in the early stages of kidney disease. And I honestly was like, who is going to adopt this cat? I mean, I really, it's a huge commitment to take on an animal with medical needs, but it was like, okay, well, let's see what we can do here. So put a picture in the paper to make Boo Boo Kitty Pet of the Week. And as it so happens, there was a retired nun who had recently lost her cat. And she had this habit, excuse the pun, of calling every cat she saw Boo Boo Kitty. And she had wanted to get another cat, but was waiting for a sign. And she opened up the paper and saw the picture of Boo Boo Kitty and said, well, this is my sign. And so she came to HSSB, and her roommate was another retired nun, and they came up and they met Boo Boo Kitty. And her friend was like, oh, I don't know, this is a lot to take on. And Boo Boo Kitty rolled over and swatted her like, oh, come on, get on board. And so Boo Boo Kitty went home with the two retired nuns. And that's when I was like, there is a lid for every pot. And
totally.
It's amazing.
And the synchronistic aspect of this Boo Boo Kitty being the word that this nun would say, or this retired nun. I'm remembering when Yoda died, and I was just crestfallen beyond belief. And I kind of bought the idea that I can't get another cat because it'll be just like replacing him. So I volunteered for the Humane Society. I was living in San Mateo area, and I volunteered over there. One of the things they do during the orientation is they walk you through the entire place. And I knew at the last stop was going to be the cat room where I had adopted Yoda. And they walked me right by Yoda's cage because I remembered exactly where it was. And right above it came this orange paw swatting me. And I was just like, I don't like orange cats all that much because that wasn't my thing. I liked gray. I liked Maine Coons. And it was this short orange tabby. And I said, can I pick him up? And she said, all right. And I held him and I was just like, this is definitely, it's on. I want to adopt him. And she said, I'm sorry, but you can't. It's after hours. You have to come back tomorrow. And I said, well, give me all the paperwork. I'll take care of it ahead of time. I faxed, back then it was faxing. Faxed it all in. They said, yep. His name is Flash. He's yours. Come on in at 5 after work. I come in after 5, and lo and behold, somebody else had taken him and not away, but had put the reserve. And I was just like, wait, you said we had a deal. And they said, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, but we do have to give it to the person who reserved. And I said, well, can I please just have 5 minutes with Flash? That was his name. And she said, sure, here's 5 minutes. And I just looked up after 5 minutes. I said, do you know who it is who's put the reservation? And she said, yeah. And I said, would you tell them if they have any reservations about their reservation that I'm here to take him home? And she said, we don't ordinarily do that, but since you're a volunteer, we'll hook you up. She comes back in the room, says, Adam, the guy who put a reservation decided he wanted a kitten. He's yours. And so I went home with this orange cat who was no replacement for Yoda, but my depression subsided by at least 60 to 80%. I was, they're vastly different, as you said, individual differences. I mean, this was the most hilarious cat I've ever seen in my life. And, yeah, it was one of the all-time great decisions. Both of my sons have, got to know him very well. He preceded my marriage, but was welcomed by my wife into it. So anyway, yes, something kind of woo-woo.
One of the things that, when you were talking about losing a beloved animal, and you also mentioned some of the barriers that people have to adopting. And, I have heard people say, after they've had a really intense love connection with an animal and that animal passes, I'll never adopt again. I can't go through that heartbreak. And, I do understand that. I talk about my cat, Wilbur, in the book, and, I call him my soulmate cat.
Totally.
And when he passed, I was absolutely devastated. It was like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. And I waited quite a while before I decided to adopt another cat. But one of the things that I have really come to understand is that adopting another animal never replaces the other animal's place in your heart. It's
totally,
like
not at all.
The place and the space in your heart where you love that animal is theirs and theirs alone. But what it causes you to do is your heart expands and you become capable of loving even more because you're able to love a new animal. And so it's not an or, it's not Wilbur or Bodhi, it's Wilbur and Bodhi.
Yeah.
And that's a really transformative experience to know that you can love, that love is infinite, and that your heart can expand to welcome a new connection into your life.
I think that's one of the most profound teachings. And I think of animals. There's a book, I believe, that's called Animals as Teachers and Healers. And I do think of animals as teachers and healers without a question. I'm wondering, with regard to relationships, especially within the context of family, I often think about this is going to sound a little dorky, but the advent of the Industrial Revolution. We used to work on farms. We used to have a common denominator in the family, but lo and behold, Industrial Revolution happens. Mom goes her way, dad goes his way, kids go their way. And there are very few things that really connect the family in a healthy way. It could be daddy's alcoholism and everybody kind of walking on eggshells, or it could be something else negative that's kind of the common denominator. But pets almost always serve as a positive common denominator. Is that consistent with your findings?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's a chapter in the book that's specifically dedicated to relationships and how animals can influence our relationships in really positive ways. And from my own experience growing up, I mean, animals really were the glue for my family. I mean, my parents were much older when they had me, so they were more like my grandparents. And so even though I have siblings, I grew up kind of feeling like an only child. And the animals in our house gave us something to laugh about and talk about and connect with. And, the research shows that. And, it's fascinating. There's an example in the book. A woman is basically saying, I can say to the kids, don't fight, and they ignore me. But when I say, you're upsetting the dog, they stop. But there's a couple of really great stories in the book that talk about that. But there's two films in particular. We did two mutual rescue films that focused on how animals can help relationships. One was Buvana and Abhishek, that basically this cat saved their marriage.
Totally.
Because it gave them something to focus on together and to care about and nurture together. And also Brian, Kim, and Lana, a couple who, lost, miscarried or actually they did have a child, but they lost their first child. And Brian went into deep, deep, deep depression. Him, thought I'll never get my husband back. And they ended up adopting a dog. And, Brian, I don't know who said this originally, but he quotes it in the film. He said, grief is just love that has no place to go.
I love that. And then their child was named Noah, the keeper of animals, which I thought was very interesting.
So they did. They ended up getting pregnant. Yeah, they got pregnant again and were actually able to have a son that they named Noah, which is wonderful. But they credit Lana with, again, saving their marriage, and that essentially Lana gave a place. Brian didn't have anywhere to put that love, and he was able to put it into Lana, and that helped reconnect them as a couple. And then they went on to actually, welcome a child into their family. And
there was another element of complication. Brian said he felt like as a male, he had no real outlet.
Yeah.
And pervasive in our society is that men have to appear strong with a swagger, and animals can really provide a portal to softening, not losing our masculine edge in any way, shape, or form. I did my TEDx talk is about men and emotions and leveraging those emotions as data. And that we become much weaker without that data. And I think that animals really, I'm using that term again, they serve as a great portal for males and females, of course, but I'm speaking about males in this moment, to really engage their softer side and to be that within the family context as well. So I think that, Lana is like one of the, I love, you have to watch all the mutual rescue videos. I mean, literally, there's not one that is less good than the next. They are all absolutely amazing. Have a box of Kleenex nearby. You're going to need them, but they feel really good to watch. And that was a spectacularly touching account, and they're all very multidimensional. They're only about 6 minutes each, but they carry the content of well over an hour's worth of wisdom. So I think that they pack a lot of punch.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're very proud of them, and I think they help people experience the message. I mean, you can talk about it all you want. You can share the science and whatnot, but it really becomes something that you experience internally and viscerally when you watch the films. And then it's nice again to have the science that's in the book that kind of goes, it's not just the heart, it's the head too. It's the whole package.
And I'm really grateful to you for that, because without that integration, it's a half-baked proposal.
Yeah.
And you have created, at least for me, a complete package. That's why I call it a compendium. It's perfect. So I'm going to have one last question for you. And This is a big one. Now, knowing that a pet isn't necessarily for everyone, and yet it's my estimation that if you could put the benefits of having a relationship with a pet into a pill, it would be one of the most commonly prescribed medications of all time. And the nice thing about having a pet in your life is there really aren't any side effects besides, having to get outdoors once in a while, and maybe finding pet sitting here and there. And of course, the financial cost, but I think the ROI associated with the pet is just so over the moon. Anyway, that's me. But if you could magically confer upon all humanity an insight, a gift, or a new behavior that would dramatically improve their lives as it relates to animals, what would it be? And if that wasn't enough, what do you think the effect would be on the individual as well as society at large?
I think one of the greatest gifts that animals give us is the ability to be in the present moment. And they connect us. They connect us to life, because we're so busy living in our heads. We're missing the present moment, and that's where life is lived. And that's what animals do. They take us into the present moment in a way that you can talk about or intellectualized, but at the end of the day, it's about being in the moment and feeling it in your body. And one of the things I love, Eckhart Tolle has a great book called The Guardians of Being. And there's so many like pithy little quotes about animals, but one of them is that the real purpose of pets hasn't truly been recognized yet. And it's that they're here to keep us sane.
And what do you think would be the effect on society at large if more of that was available? What if more people were actually signing on for this?
Yeah. Well, in the very closing part of the book, I reference a quote by Confucius, and it starts out with talking about, if you want to save the world, you need to think about your community. If you want to save your community, you need to think about your neighborhood. If you want to save your neighborhood, you need to think about your family. If you want to think about your family, you've got to start with yourself. And if you're going to start with yourself, you need to learn how to open your heart. And the question is, how do you learn how to open your heart? And I would suggest a great place to start is by adopting a homeless family.
Well, you have been medicine for my heart today, I've got to say. And I'm so grateful to you for your time and for the work that you do for small communities and for society at large. You are making a huge difference, Carol.
Well, thank you so much. It was an absolute delight to be here. Really had fun.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.